So pretty recently, Kellyanne Conway went on the news to defend Sean Spicer's remarks about the inauguration crowd sizes. Sean Spicer claimed that the actual size of the crowd was much larger than the National Park Service had actually surveyed and estimated. And when the reporter confronted her about the conflicting remarks, she claimed that her stance was aided by alternative facts. And this has sparked a huge debate amongst the media and also society in general as to what an alternative fact is. Is it credible? Can alternative facts be used in an argument? The reason why it's important to define what an alternative fact is to figure out if there is a way to validate facts in general, and if there's a universal standard to facts. And if there is, do alternative facts fit into that standard? And if they don't, how can we use them in arguments?
So in order to properly address and discover what causes someone to accept an alternative fact as a truth, we're going to have to figure out what their schema is. And we're going to be looking at three key components of schema: reason, sensory perception, and faith. Your opinions on how you make logical decisions and the things you accept from your sensory perception and where you apply your faith really make up the facts that you accept as well. So this is going to be really important to figuring out what really causes people to accept things that might not be true just based on their biases. So basically what we're going to be looking at is how do faith, reason, and sensory perception make up one schema?
So let's start our dive into the world of TOK with our first way of knowing that influences our schema, sensory perception. Sensory perception is defined as any of the facilities of sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch by which the body perceives an external stimulus. It comprises the way in which we see the world in a literal sense. The information we gather through our senses makes up the bulk of our schema. Through the tools that comprise our senses, we develop personal facts about the nature of the world. These senses are the vessels through which we experience life, and through which our memories are formed. Sense of smell, for example, has been shown to be tightly connected with our memory. As a result, our utilization of the olfactory system can have great long-term effects on our schema. In my case, my grandparents' house always has a distinct smell to it. I'm not sure if it's my grandma's perfume or a type of flower that they've planted or what, but I can always relate this certain smell to their house. As a result, whenever I smell this scent, no matter where I am, I start to think about family parties that I've had at their house or other memories that I can recall from their home. Consequently, I always become happier when I smell it. This is an example of how our senses can influence our perception of events and how our senses dictate our memories. The response of my memories in that smell is a sort of Pavlovian relationship. However, instead of a physical response, like the dogs had of salivating, the response I had was internal and affected my schema. While the sense of smell is most closely related to memory, it's not the only sense that influences our memories or our schema. All senses work in generally the same way, in that a memory, whether it's visual, audible, etc., they're all affects our experiences. Similarly, just as these senses can affect our feelings on a certain situation, they can affect our expectations of how present events will transpire. Seeing someone act a certain way will influence how we expect them to act in the future, just as hearing someone sound a certain way will influence how we expect them to sound in the future, or tasting something will affect how we expect that thing to taste. And this all happens largely unconsciously. So sensory perception, which is the building blocks of our schema, affects both how we interpret certain events and how we expect certain events to unfold. It's clear that sensory perception has a great influence on our schema overall. Now let's talk about reason. As a way of knowing, reason is defined as the use of logic, judgment, comparison, and experience to obtain knowledge. All of these pathways through which reason is used, they're all important to understand. First, logic, while seemingly synonymous with reason, has a few important distinctions that we should address. In a way, logic is the most basic form of reason. It relies solely on facts and follows strict rules and guidelines to form conclusions. As a quick example, concluding that a ball will fall after you drop it would be a utilization of logic. Following scientific facts, in this case gravity, a logical conclusion is made. However, logic is somewhat limited in that you cannot expand on these known facts to come up with other conclusions. So saying that the ball will make a noise, for example, when it hits the floor, is not a use of logic. Instead, that would more appropriately fall under the category of judgment. Judgment is a decision as to whether something is good or bad, true or false, or in the case of our example, probable or improbable. Next comes comparison. Comparison is used within reason whenever two decisions are weighed against each other based on possible outcomes. Instead of acting on a whim or based on a gut feeling, possible consequences or rewards of a situation can be concluded from certain choices that you make. In analyzing these choices against each other, you are using reason through comparison. The last segment is experience. When coming to conclusions or making decisions, very often you may rely on past experiences. In doing so, you can better infer how certain choices will result. Also, using past experiences can help contextualize certain information and influence what information is accepted and what is dismissed. So how does reason influence our schema? Well, all these aspects of reason, logic, judgment, comparison, and experience, all come into play when applying our schema to the real world. Reason, unlike sensory perception, does not make up our schema. Instead, reason is one tool through which our schema is applied to our daily lives. For instance, when deciding whether a piece of information is accepted as truth, reason is often a primary player in this process. Experiences may be recalled so that information can be connected to past events, or alternative information may be weighed against it to compare and decide which is accepted. Further, the likelihood of the information could be judged, or the information could be related to previously accepted facts. Either way, in the case of reason as a way of knowing, it is only involved with the interpretation of our schema, not the actual makeup of our schema as a whole. In terms of accepting things as truth, again, reason is utilized to connect our schema to the decisions that we are faced with. The implication here is that just as important as our actual schema are the methods through which we use it. So depending on how the schema is recalled, it's possible that two people with the exact same schema could come up with different solutions to the same problem, or may have different interpretations of whether a fact is actually true or not. This is also true in the reverse, in that people who rely on the same way of knowing may disagree because their sensory perception is different.